contribution as well as Philip Grindrod on the take questions and answers to both the speakers. Okay, let's see. Who hasn't raised a question yet? Naeem?
I mean, I think we've been talking about Brexit, but it actually goes before Brexit, isn't it? I think the reason why we are here today is because we have failed the British people, right? The reason why Brexit was considered by the population here is because we have failed to deliver to certain areas of the country, particularly in the Midlands, the North, and I think that's why we are discussing Brexit. And I think both our national government and regional governments, the local government and the West Midland Authority have actually failed, because I think if you're looking at the problems at Jaguar Land Rover, it's not just to do with Brexit, it's to do with the fact that the infrastructure is not there for us to be able to continue the electrification process. And I think that's one of the failures. Now I think we need to know from our councillors what have they done in that respect, because I think if we go to Berlin, my daughter has gone and worked in Berlin now because she couldn't get a job in the field that she has trained in this country, and she's working as a non-German speaker. And I think the whole city is actually buzzing with new technology, with new ideas and new companies developing. That's not happening in Birmingham. Why is that? I mean, why is the councils and why the regional government and the national government has actually failed in generating that kind of enthusiasm that exists in Berlin, for example? There are lots and lots of IT companies that have actually gone and invested. And I think in Birmingham we discussed this over a decade ago, or well, within the last decade, about what's happening with Capita, for example. You know, and the arguments were put forward that we will actually try and generate technology firms in this city, but nothing has happened. Why is that? And I think that's the question that we need answers to. It's not just a question of Brexit that we face today.
I'll take two more questions. Brother, yes?
Yeah. I'm Michael Thor. I'm a Edgbaston CLP member. I'm just going to come through it through a different perspective. I mean, I'm quite interested in this paper that was actually pushed out, where it's got all these lovely pretty headlines and sort of, you know, words that realistically doesn't really fundamentally look like it's talking to the people. And ultimately, this is what it's about. I was a polling clerk on the day of Brexit, and obviously, you know, I've done all this polling, and you know, since the last election for the last 4 or 5 years. What was fundamentally changed for me was that when we opened up at 7 o'clock, there was 100 people outside the polling station. That has never happened. I live in a part of a place you probably never heard of called Hearne, which has, right, this is how bizarre this is. I live in a place called Welsh House Farm, right? It's one of the, I will say, a place with challenges. I hate the term deprived because that really does hit home with people. These are people who I see every day who have not directly benefited in any shape or form from this Brexit, the European Union. We've got a community centre that was put in by European funding, yet our city council and our local councillors have decided to shut that down, take out the services where vulnerable people who I see every day, some of whom are coming to ask me personally for food vouchers and support, has gone. Now, with respect to you, Fred, Bourneville, I would presume, is like an affluent area, whereas Welsh House Farm really has its challenges. I would just put it on that level, that you've got to start talking to the people, because you've got to take them with you. You come into the city centre, it's all these shiny, shiny buildings, yet they're all bloody empty. Yet there are tower blocks on Welsh House Farm that are absolutely terrible, right? But you're not talking that message. You keep, you know, people when they talk about academia, nobody bloody cares about that, right? 17.5 million people told you we want out because we want change, because the European Union has failed Britain. Simple as that. And I do not advocate any form of a people's vote at all. You've already had the decision, go with it and try to get the best deal you can.
I'll take a third question. Anyone not raised a question before? I want to be fair with people. Okay, Stuart?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand that we've had two contradictory views from different Labour politicians here. I mean, Jack Dromey has got a view on the EU more favourable than I have, but at least he had a clear position that there had been a referendum vote, 17 million people voted, and we should go with that, and we should discuss the whole arrangement of a transitional relationship, which I think is essentially the correct position, whereas Councillor Grindrod is essentially angry about Brexit and wants to rerun it, you know. And I think the problem with these talk about people's votes is that, well, if the decision is reversed, well, can people then say, well, let's have a third referendum, the best of the three, or four? That's a actually, that sounds ridiculous, but it's actually happened in the Irish Republic. They kept on having referendums until the ruling class view was accepted. So that's an appalling abuse of democracy. I also think it's a bit sort of cheeky for him to talk about workers' rights when he's a councillor supporting, you know, the use of the Tory anti-union laws against the bin workers and the unison members. And I notice he's not one of the courageous councillors who've actually sort of condemning this, actually.
To be fair, they didn't ask me.
Well,
so
right,
Albert doesn't know me well enough. So therefore,
should publicly state
you can add your name. I'm
and
sure.
just can I just finish?
I do find it interesting.
All right, well, you can reply in a
very
minute.
on
You can
that
reply in a
debate.
minute. Yeah. The whole question of anti-Semitism mentioned. I mean, I think nobody denies that there is a very small minority, including a very small minority in the Labour Party, who are anti-Semitic, and action should be taken against people in the Labour movement who are genuinely that. But probably a majority of the people being expelled from the Labour Party are Jewish, and people like Mark Wadsworth, you know, don't engage in no anti-Semitic activity, and it's a complete abuse of the process. And what is very interesting, and I'll finish with this, the people who go on about this, like Adonis, he says it's hostility to Jews and hostility to the state of Israel, i.e. that if you're a critic, a sharp critic of Israel, then you become automatically anti-Semitic. And that's what's wrong with what's going on in the Labour Party.
Okay, thank you.
Please, yeah, you go. First up, I'm not here to talk about the anti-Semitism issue.
No.
You know, take that issue up with Jack. So, you know, I'd like to leave that one. We can talk about it afterwards if that was helpful. Yeah, the people's vote situation going through that. I think we're, you know, a good CWU colleague of mine in my ward came up shortly after Brexit, and he set out his problem and why he thought another referendum, because he basically said that referendums under the UK kind of unwritten constitution should be about Parliament asking the people to ratify a policy decision. And it's then, you know, they say this is such a severity that we ask you to ratify it. The only question on the 2016 referendum was, do you want to leave the European Union, right? I have no problem with us leaving the European Union. If we leave it in such a way that we do not lose our workers' rights, we do not lose environmental protections, we have the exact same standards and improved standards, and we have maintain our quality of life, and we do not decline as a society. Our academic colleague, and I know you don't want to hear academics, but our academic colleague said it is a net negative to the United Kingdom. All the economic, is coherent on that. As to what level, then that's obviously a debate. I think a net negative on the United Kingdom hits the poorer, the communities with most challenged, working people most. And I think we should be challenging that. That's why I think that we're moving from a referendum that said, what would you like, to a referendum to say, this is Parliament, this is government's proposition to the people, Theresa May's withdrawal agreement, as the colleague has set out, moving on to an implementation period, moving on to then a final deal, and we should be able to say, do we want that deal, or do we want to stay with what we have now? Now what we have now might not be good, but what if that deal is worse? Surely we shouldn't just inflict a set of policy decisions on the people of Britain that declines this country, that makes the rich richer, that undermines our workers' rights, without asking them if it was the right thing to do. I genuinely think that the outcome of doing that would be so disastrous and so undermining of democracy. You know, it is undemocratic to ask people to vote again. Yes, the European Union has asked people to vote again in Ireland, in Denmark, in the Netherlands, and in Switzerland. And they've done it, and they've taken it. And I don't see riots on the streets of those countries because they did it. Because basically, yes, the decision happened, and people were able to fight, and they were asked to reconsider their decision. It's an asking to reconsider. Okay, if we have another election, if we're so confident that the people of Britain want Brexit, let's have another referendum, and if they win it, then they win it. But they'll win it in a different way. They'll win it on a set of clear policies of what we're going to have. And I think that's what I'm really after on that one. No, I think your point's spot on, because fundamentally at the end of this is a guy called David Cameron, and his arrogance in treating our country and our working people with contempt by delivering an austerity regime that fundamentally ripped up our public sphere and our public realm, that kind of declined the wages of pretty much every working person, and that basically couldn't deal with his own internal politics, and so ran away and hid behind an open-ended referendum that's done so much damage. Absolutely agree with you. We need massive investment in infrastructure and technology. I'm a relatively new councillor. Apologies that I'm come with that.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the things I believe. Fundamentally, we need a massive expansion of our tram system in this city. I was in Germany. I was in Munich last week. I've been on holiday, and then I was with work. I was with some trade unions in Bremen, and the public infrastructure was just so light years ahead of where we are in order to make sure. There's a study been done recently that shows why Birmingham doesn't manage to kind of hold its own with its equivalent cities in Europe, and it's all about the transport to work area. You can get from Cottridge in my ward, it takes you 3 times as long as from Wednesbury on the tram because of the buses. That's a ridiculous situation for any city to be in, and we've got to challenge that. We've got to start investing in supporting and developing new enterprise. One of the things that the European Social Investment Funds did, they enable that to happen without government turning it and putting it in another pocket to make rich people richer. I've been a Labour Party activist in Essex and Hertfordshire when I worked for the TUC, and I saw what Tory councils did in those areas, and I recognise there's a lot of problems, a lot of challenges in Birmingham City Council at the moment. I'm not here to defend that or to disagree with that. But what I am here to say is that when Tories get control of these things, they do absolute damage, and I think that that should be resisted as well. So that's my contribution there. I do believe that we need to go back with the proposition that Theresa May has to the people and ask them whether they want it or whether they want to remain in the status quo.
Yeah, okay. I want to pick up on the point that you made very specifically about certain buildings being shut. And I lived in Holborn once upon a time, but I'm not familiar with your part of the ward. I'm obviously nothing to do with that. I'm not a politician and I'm not a councillor, but I do think one of the issues that relates to certainly one of my research areas is why people voted the way they did. And one of the things that we've seen is there is actually now the first piece of academic evidence which suggests that a policy of what people colloquially call austerity was a contributory factor to people voting in the way that they did, and it may have been a large enough contributory factor to have pushed the vote from the status quo ante to wanting to leave. The second point I would make is that within that, it's also how that policy has been implemented is key, right? And ironically, unlike the early Thatcher government, where less of the burden of fiscal adjustment, has fallen on rising taxes than it has on cutting spending. So what you've seen is cuts in government spending have been much, much larger proportionally than any attempt to increase taxes to try and close, again, a deficit. Now there's a whole bunch of questions about that, and I can go in more detail, but I'll bore everyone to tears. And I would say that the area that has had the biggest cuts has been local government. The amount of money which has been cut from local government is frankly astonishing. If I had that kind of cut to my income, I would have to move house. I could not afford to pay my mortgage if I'd had that kind of cut to my income. In terms of why these things have happened, a significant chunk of that is due to a very, very particular government policy.
George Osborne.
And it's government policy that was introduced, and I'm not saying this to make a party political point at all. It's a government policy that was introduced not on the basis of economic evidence, and I think we need to be very clear about that. The policy, colloquially known as austerity, was not because of any economic evidence suggesting that it needed to be implemented. Right? It is economically illiterate to try and cut government spending and cut a deficit when interest rates are at their lower bound. Interest rates are virtually zero and have been for a decade. So I just wanted to make that fundamental point, that the way in which that policy has been implemented is fundamentally linked to Brexit, at least according to some of the latest research. So that is a key point there, the key reason why you're seeing some of the things that you're seeing on the streets, real people's lives.
Okay. Okay, I'll take two more questions, please.
Yeah, it's just looking at things that have happened before. I mean, there is a precedent for leaving the EU, which is Iceland at Grindrod. And I mean, you know, have the people benefited from this, or has it become difficult?
It has the highest
what were the sort
suicide
of
rate.
outcomes in that, you know, in that respect? And also, Norway, we talk about Norway Plus. I mean, I don't know what the plus indicates, what it is, but I think it was a Conservative member of the Norwegian government that said that, you know, be in the EU and then you can control, you've got some control, but being in the EEC and so on, you are run by Europe. You know, there's nothing, you've got no say in the matter. But I mean, as far as ordinary people are concerned, can they vote? You know, I'm told that if you vote for a party, if you vote for an individual, it makes no difference in the context of the EU, because the policies or what's happening will happen anyway. And you know, there's no real say in that. All right, the MEPs discuss it and so on, but they're not the decision makers.
Okay, thank you. And finally, brother.
Oh, thanks. I was a little bit. I mean, I've always been very, very sceptical about academic studies. I mean, a lot of my experience with academics is they don't have a particularly great grasp of life in the real world. Which I think Michael alluded to, and also Michael Gove maybe.
He's with you on that one too.
Maybe. I mean, I think it's we should take once again with a pinch of salt what academics say, and of course once again your source material comes from the very same what I would regard as toxic sources, people with a vested interest and an axe to grind to have a particular view, to end up with a particular outcome. So I don't take a lot of what you said, frankly, particularly seriously. I was interested about the customs checks you're referring to. I read something on Facebook a while back in one of the left-wing threads. It was actually a press cut, it's not someone's gossip, that Chris Grayling has been banned from the port of Calais for scaremongering about what the end result of Brexit is going to be. And the port director said it's going to be very little different to what it is now. So, I mean, of course, some of this was conflated, of course, to justify his decision to award that £14 million contract to a company with no ferries to allegedly sort this problem out. But the point is, once again, it's heavily exaggerated by people who've got a vested interest in keeping things the way they are. And I'm very disturbed that these things are treated as gospel truth by people, because you're just a propaganda thing. And at the end of the day, whatever treaties say and so on, what we should have been doing, and what Jeremy Corbyn should be doing, is saying, this is our exit agreement. This is what we want to do: £10 our minimum wage, the ability to renationalise industries, state aid where it's necessary, an end to zero-hours contracts, and we negotiate around that. And I think what you'll find, particularly if that's linked to overthrowing, to calling a general election and bringing May's very, very weak and wobbly government down, you would end up in a much stronger negotiating position, because you'll have a prime minister with a mandate rather than someone who's dead woman walking.
Thank you. That was the final question.
It was.
Yeah, John, on Greenland, yeah, I mean, you know, Greenland was a dependency of Denmark, and so there's still a lot of kind of relationship between the two. And when it became independent of Denmark, it wanted to break away completely from Denmark's circuit. You know, it has had incredibly negative impacts. That breaking away from Denmark, you could argue, given independence, yes, but you know, the darkness issue does come into play. But it's similar kind of equivalent areas don't have the same level of suicide. It is the place with the highest level of suicide in the world. So, but also its poverty, and challenges are massive. I met with some Danish trade unionists a couple of years back and explained that it is not a place we want to go and look at. Norway is a different matter. Norway, obviously, Norway's really interesting because absolutely that. It has no choice because of its agreements with. So why Norway Plus is different, I think, though colleague David might correct me, is Norway Plus means Norway is only in the single market. It's not in the customs union. So Norway Plus is being in the customs union as well. And the customs union is a absolute red line for Labour. Labour wants to be in the customs union no matter what happens. That is a minimum standard that we must be in according, as we've set out. Both Jeremy and John McDonnell have said that out. Norway Plus, so Norway is, yeah, absolutely, they take all the rules. But the clever way they do it is that they make sure all their standards are better, because as a social democratic society, much more of a strong, set of social democratic kind of consensus, they're able to argue that. I spoke to one of the most senior trade unionists in Norway who works for one of the European GC organisations, one of global international trade union organisations, who's very clear. The only reason Norway is not in the European Union is because of fish and fishing waters. It's the only thing. So if it wasn't for the fishing issue, they'd be in there. They just want to maintain control of their fishing waters, which often means doing things that we wouldn't like them doing if we came from, in terms of the whaling and that kind of stuff, right? They don't want to be challenged. You often find that the countries within Europe that aren't in the European Union are doing it for a reason that we as socialists wouldn't be particularly pleased with. So the reason why, one of the big reasons why the Swiss aren't in there is because they don't want to get under any kind of level of financial control, and the various, attempts by the EU to kind of work out what's in those bank accounts, right, and the regulation, right? That's why they're not there. And again, so it's it's a beneficial for the rich reason for not being in there, not a beneficial for working people. And I think that's something we really do need to get back to. The other point is absolutely in terms of we would have to accept this control. I haven't quite got my head around this, so forgive me if someone knows better. But the jewellery quarter, it mainly functions on the hallmarking process. The hallmarking process is part of the Vienna Convention, with a number of mostly European countries signed up to what a standard of metal is within a particular jewellery product. And that in turn has been subsumed into a European Union kind of network and a way of doing things, right? If we're outside of that process, the Germans and the Dutch will club together to make it harder for our jewellers to meet those processes. Whilst we're in the room fighting for the standards, we can maintain our industry. When we're out of it, we will be, particularly if we end up in Theresa May's deal or in a Norway Plus scenario, we will have to accept what they do.
Chucky, where did they get the hallmark idea from?
Well, indeed, but that's part of the Vienna Convention, right? And that's how, so it's a whole set of things that we will be outside. And I think that being outside of those will be disastrous. The idea that we would take back control by actually giving out lots more control will be, and Chris Grayling and the ferries. Chris Grayling has been, I read that story too, but I read it from different sources. Chris Grayling really wants Brexit. And again, I have to question. People have a go at me sometimes because I support People's Vote, and they say, "Well, you're on the thing with Anna Soubry." And I don't want to be on the platform with Anna Soubry. But I'll tell you something, Chris Grayling. But Chris Grayling, is an incompetent, and the idea that he may, another week has passed that he's still in the cabinet is a real shocking thing for any Democrat, I think. If we want a Corbyn government, I genuinely believe it has to go through questioning Brexit, coming up with a better deal if it's possible, and recognising that if there isn't a better deal, we do need a route to stop this. And that's where I think that we will get a Corbyn government, and then we will be able to, prevent austerity, unpick austerity, rebuild the economy, invest in the right industries that we need to bring about. John McDonnell's been doing some great work on this. I think there's a real lot of stuff for us to have. I know you talk about academics, but John McDonnell has been doing a really great, working with some of the academics to understand what could be done. He was clear yesterday. If there is another referendum and he says we're moving towards it, he would vote Remain. It's, he recognises that those challenges that he initially thought were there, like Jack said, are not there as much as he thought they were. And there are fellow colleagues and campaigners and trade unionists who want to change those things from within the European Union. I work with them quite regularly, and I believe that that's where we should go to. Thank you. Sorry, that's me.
Okay, let's deal with both of these points in turn. The Greenland issue. Has anyone seen a map recently? because Greenland's quite a long way away from the rest of continental Europe. The channel is about 20 miles wide. So without, and I'm being facetious, obviously, and I'm not trying to be rude. But the key issue there is that what applies in the case of Greenland, which is a very, very sparsely populated place, does not necessarily apply in the case of the UK. Now, I'm not using that example to say there should be no Brexit, but I am saying that be wary about trying to draw universal conclusions from somewhere that looks very different to the UK. Norway is a really interesting example. Yeah, Norway Plus basically refers to the fact that Norway is not in the customs union with is not in the European Union customs union. So Norway Plus is essentially economic area, EEA plus customs union membership. Has its own challenges. I do not believe that British membership of the European Economic Area would be as straightforward to negotiate as a lot of people think. In fact, I think it would be horrendously complicated, actually. And one of the reasons for that is that Norway, for example, has the right to derogate from European Union rules. It has that right. Norway has never, ever, ever chosen to do this. But it does have the right. So does Iceland, and so does Liechtenstein, which is the other EEA member. That's actually really important, because in the quid pro quo for that is that Norway, if it does derogate from EU rules in those areas, the EU then in return has the right to suspend its membership in those areas only of the single market. So there's a key part to that. The second issue is that will not be good enough. EEA membership will not be good enough for the EU. For the UK to be an EEA member will not be good enough for the EU, and there are two reasons for that. One of them is fundamental and the other is political. You might say they're both political, but right. The fundamental one is Northern Ireland, because Article, is that 126 or 127? Someone look it up for me. Of the EEA Convention states that any state may leave, providing it gives a minimum of 12 months' notice. Right? Now let that sink in a minute. Because if EEA is your end game, even if it's EEA plus customs union membership, right, and you have that right to leave after 12 months, well, that's not going to be good enough for a European Union that wants to guarantee a frictionless border between Southern Ireland and Northern Ireland indefinitely, in perpetuity, right? Unless some kind of technological innovation comes along and solves that problem for us, which it may well do in the fullness of time. But that is not going to be good enough in the near future. And by near future, I mean any time before about 2030. So, it won't be as easy as people think. That's point number one. There will need to be some kind of workaround to ensure that things are tied. That will then come across the very same set of problems that we already have, which is that people in the UK do not want part of the country to be subject to a different jurisdiction, different legal framework, fundamentally, than the rest of us. It doesn't make, in some ways, it's problematic. Now, there's a lot of arguments that say there's already checks between between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and that's absolutely true. There's an argument to be made about whether, about Irish reunification. There's arguments to be had over all kinds of issues. How much of a problem even is it if the ECJ has jurisdiction over what fundamentally is a relatively small part of the UK? I'm not going to get into that, but I am going to say there's a big set of issues there that you need to deal with. The second reason why EEA membership probably won't be good enough for the EU is fishing rights, because it's a lot easier to fail to give someone something than to take it away, right? Now, Norway might well be in a position not to give its fishing rights away or not to make fishing rights a part of that. The Spanish fishermen in particular, but also the French, have had extensive rights to fish in UK waters for a very long time now, right? You suddenly take that away, that's going to pose real issues. That will be a real sticking point in terms of negotiations if EEA membership, Norway Plus, is your end game. So don't think that's going to be easy, and it really doesn't matter in that regard who's at the negotiating table. That will still be difficult, whoever does it. To come back to your point, I'm very interested. What specific vested interest am I representing? But secondly, what is the what particular set of final facts and figures are particularly worrisome? Because if your general point is that there's been a lot of exaggeration and a lot of fear mongering, then I wouldn't disagree with you. So I'm intrigued, and I'm not trying to be combative. I'm genuinely trying to get a one-to-one going here.
Perhaps we should postpone that till after.
Okay, yeah.
But it's a general issue. People have had enough of experts, and it's a.
Are we going to include it? Because that's what the chap, he did
Yeah.
say right at the beginning, he was going to say a question answer, so we could then have to dialogue. Do you not want us to do
Yeah,
that?
it is on the agenda. There's a,
Okay.
have you-
I'm happy to discuss when you want, but I'm genuinely interested. I really am.
Okay. What we'll now do is we'll have